thick. I have the original report, a copy of it. I said to him, but there's 2 signatures on that report, real signatures, a professional seal. Nope, you forged those 2. It gets worse, I'm sorry. We have Richardson ground squirrels. We call them gophers on the prairies. The prairies are vast, wide open spaces of wild grasses and massive room and spiritual room, and you can see for miles and miles and miles. It's a really great place to live. But we have all these little guys, and we get Kevin Pilger's gopher shit sampling technique. I don't think Kevin was smart enough to come up with this technique. I think the industry and the energy regulator probably coached him. What he did, on the first sampling of Debbie's water, he found no E. coli. Now, you know E. coli is deadly. No E. coli. So then he comes a month later, on a very hot day, had just been a thunderstorm. Her water well's new, lots of mud, lots of gopher shit. I'm a scientist. I observed all this feces around her water well. One of the neighbors was there, had just done chores, so she had her boots on, her muck boots on. There was still a bit of good old cow manure on the bottom of her boots. There were dogs. There were 7 elders from the Yukon who had come down for a tour on fracking. And Kevin is resting his sampling equipment with a rope, which you never use in sampling water because you can't sterilize it. He's resting it in the well and out of the well into the mud and the gopher shit again and again and again. So I said, Kevin, you're introducing contaminants into Debbie's water well. And he got pretty angry. On this one fraudulent data set for all of us across Alberta that had contaminated water after fracking, they blamed all of us for bacteria, for being dirty water well owners. They never even found E. coli in my water. They didn't find it in the Campbell's water. They didn't find it in Zimmerman's. They didn't find it in Debbie's water on the first day they sampled before the gopher shit sampling technique. Best in the world. Then the regulator interrogates me, the lawyer for the energy regulator, Rick McKee, nasty, nasty bully. I was terrified. He tries to get the evidence after the fact of me being a criminal. But he admits on tape, because I didn't trust him either at this point. I had a witness, and I tape recorded the whole session. Or not the whole thing, I ran out of tape, but he says on tape that they never considered me a threat. They never considered me a criminal. They had done what they did to try to silence me. He admitted, if you stop telling anybody anything, we'll give you energy regulation. As long as you talk to your neighbors or your friends or your family about what Encana did, you get no energy regulation. Fascism in Canada. This is a worldwide problem. The international network of experts on this, on the leaking energy wells, they get together regularly. I've read their first reports. This is in their second one. First key conclusion, clearly a problem worldwide. And we have 30 to 110 milligrams of methane in our water. This is Debbie Signer's water. The regulator actually purged her water well properly. The rest of ours, they didn't. So we probably all have this level. This is just the Rosebud water. Remember, risk of explosion at 1 milligram. And our historic records said gas present, no. Industry has testified, as well as I had testified to a parliamentary committee in 2007, and they have said if they find methane in water wells, they presume it's naturally occurring. Of course, all methane is naturally occurring. What's not natural, though, is the drilling and the perforating and the fracking and the acidizing and the servicing and the cementing, which is very much like fracking. That's not natural. But still, why would they presume it's naturally occurring? Why wouldn't they say, well, let's test it. If we find methane, we'll send the samples off to Dr. Carlos Muhlenbach, who is the king of fingerprinting it, and we'll find out if we caused the problem or if nature did. They have now determined, this is the energy regulator before it changed names, this is around 2007, they have determined that not only are well bores leaking all over the world, but they're leaking, they have a higher potential for leaking in the shallow zones where the bacteriological methane is. This is where the deeper thermogenic gases are. And they have actually now quantified this, that 70% of the leaking hydrocarbons come from the shallower zones. So when people get the bacteriological methane in their water wells, It's most likely coming from leaking energy wells from the shallow zones, leaking into groundwater, and then migrating into water wells or buildings. In Pennsylvania, a medical center had to shut down because fracking nearby had compromised an abandoned well, and it caused so much gas migration into the building, they couldn't operate in there. So now the community has not just been fracked, they've lost their medical facility. How would you like it if your doctor here, if you couldn't go see Carol because the building's too dangerous to go into? It's a life-threatening contamination. Then we have the monitoring fraud. The regulator then drilled monitoring wells in my community, 6 years too late, to gather baseline data. Here's one of them. This was the handle on it. I went to look at it. When they had drilled it, there was only methane and ethane in this well, no water, and so much gas that the handle was shaking like this. Then the regulator switched labs. Carlos had said, yep, nope, those are the industry wells that look like Encana's the guilty party. So they switched to the University of Calgary, which has a much less accurate mass spec. I'm not going to go into all the details, but the University of Calgary needs 300 parts per million of ethane. Carlos only needs 10. And another lab at Lloydminster only needs 5. If you're the energy regulator, wouldn't you want to use the best? Or the second best? If people's lives are in danger and you already know Bruce, Jack, plus 2 industry gas and water testers were nearly killed, plus our water manager was nearly killed. We asked for duplicates to be taken by the regulator. That's before the lab switch, after. These are the ethane fingerprints, not the methane. Methane can be fingerprinted, but it's nowhere near as accurate. The ethane's much more accurate. These are our duplicates after the regulator study. Even that study where the energy wells were fracked much deeper have a match pretty close to our water wells. These are energy wells, the ethane fingerprint. And Encana, out of 200 gas wells that Encana fracked in the freshwater zones in our community, the regulator only got samples for fingerprinting on one of them. But look at how close a match that is. Minus 43, very close to mine, and a couple other people in the community. It's very damning data. No wonder they switched labs. Plus methane is not made by, or ethane is not made by bacteria. So the Research Council is retained by the water regulator to review our water wells, and I finally find lawyers. It took me 2 years. And they tell me we have quite some very terrifying conversations. I believed we had justice in clean and regulated Canada. And they tell me not only will it take me 10 to 12 years to get anywhere with my case, it'll cost me $1 million to maybe win 20,000, and I most likely will never see justice for myself or my community's water. I never did this lawsuit to make money. People in Alberta smear me and discredit me and online and to newspaper articles saying I'm just trying to get rich quick. And then the worst thing that they tell me is that because I will not gag and settle, which is what everybody else does when they get contamination by the oil and gas industry, I believe that water belongs to us all. It moves no judge, in my view, and not in my opinion either. I don't believe that we have the legal right to seal contamination of drinking water by the oil and gas industry. It must be kept public. So I won't gag and settle. And our rules in Canada are like yours here. We copied the UK's rules on this. If you are offered, or if the defendants offer me an amount of money out of court to gag and settle, and I say no, and the judge gives me a win in court, but I win less than they offer me out of court, I have to pay their legal fees as well as mine, even though I win. So you have that for your justice here. If any of you are like me and believe the data needs to be made public, these judges are signing contamination cases right, left, and center. They are signing them shut. They are sealing the data. And the companies never have to admit responsibility when there's a gag and settle. And I decided to go forward anyways, because fracking is so bad and causing so much damage, and water's too important. I never loved a being ever as much as I love this dog. he was killed, just about killed me. Journalists phoned me up freaking out saying, Jess, you've got to get out of there because you're next. My lawyers said, get the hell out of there. And I did. I left and I ran away for a while. I went hiding to a cabin I have in Saskatchewan. And my lawyer said, we're fine to drop the lawsuit if you don't want to continue. We totally understand. But I said, no, we're going to keep going. So we filed my legal papers. I'm suing the water regulator, the energy regulator, and Encana. And then I read this incredible report, Fracked Academics. Everybody gets fracked. The corruption. I have worked in this industry my whole life. I have never seen such a level of corruption as what comes with fracking. It's unbelievable. So Alice Woolley is a law prof at the University of Calgary. It's largely controlled by oil and gas money, so I can understand them being unwilling to speak up for people being harmed by oil and gas. But she writes this report titled Enemies of the State. She puts in her report hearsay that contradicts the official hearing transcripts, never interviews me, and smears me in this paper. The water regulator, now remember, I just filed my legal papers. The water regulator, the Research Council was supposed to do an independent review of their shoddy investigations. And this took me 5 years. 2012, a year after my lawsuit went public. So 2012, I got the results of a Freedom of Information search I did to the Research Council, proving that Steve Wallace secretly edited every single one of the so-called independent reports done by Alexander Blythe. PhD, Dr. Blythe, let the regulator alter his reports, including the conclusions. And the council ignored the damning ethane fingerprinting data as we expected. They ignored the historic records that said gas present no. They ignored that Encana broke the law in their report on my case. They reported the chromium at a concentration 1,000 times less than the lab report in the appendix on my case, or on my case. And they blamed nature, bacteria. They didn't use the data at Rosebud that proved Encana guilty. They used data from over 100 miles north on wells that were fracked much deeper. And to this day, I have tried via Freedom of Information to get this data. I still don't have it, after paying thousands of dollars and giving up hundreds of hours of my time. They take away our water. They say our water's safe. They tell us to vent it like they told Bruce Jack to vent it. You saw how much that protected him. Here's my truck here. I have to drive 45 minutes one way. That's Bandit's brother, Magic. This is the new water tower that they had to replace the one that blew up. It cost the community almost $700,000. They were promised $150, and Encana hadn't even given it to them yet. I lose my storage room. This is my laundry room. I have these big tanks. The government paid for these. World Oil stated in a report, gas migration can occur anytime the seal of a gas-bearing zone is disturbed. That is every frack. We serve the legal papers on the parties. National News airs a tiny segment on my case. And then we have, do you remember this guy? Prime Minister Stephen Harper, Canada's ex-Prime Minister. Well, he suddenly created an anti-terrorist squad of 43 officers from the RCMP, but one of the headlines in the paper when they first announced these guys was to protect the oil and gas industry in Alberta. And oops, somebody must have noticed the big boo-boo, then they added, comma, and the public. A few hours later. We saved snaps of both. Well, he said he sends this anti-terrorist squad to come harass me and intimidate me. Where I live is very beautiful. So here they are coming up my driveway. This is my driveway here. And this guy was the lead guy, and he hears me taking pictures, and he yells at me, or he kind of gruffly, he didn't yell, he says, "You can't take our photo, we're undercover." And I said, a lot of people are being arrested all around the world because of this. Don't bow down. I won't bow down. But I'm always polite, and I'm friendly, but I'm firm. And so he says, I can't take his photo because they're undercover. And I said, yes, I can. You're trespassing. And I'm not giving you my camera. So if nature did that, would they send the RCMP to harass me? In Northeast British Columbia, and Canada had a massive sour gas blowout, deadly. Frac sand, again, these impacts are massive on these wells. And the frac sand causes a lot of damage to the equipment. And it was frac sand. The regulator did a review on this and found out the frac sand caused this problem, which resulted in a hydrogen sulfide release that's deadly. The regulator and in Canada did not rescue the people. The people rescued themselves. They all could have died. And Canada was to face criminal charges, and they bought themselves off with a $250,000 gift to the community. Schlumberger's CEO has admitted that fracking is being done by brute force and ignorance. That was 2010. They are still doing it by brute force and ignorance. It's an experiment. Then I notice online, I went to the water regulators, 2010. The historic water records in Alberta were pulled, removed. I don't think our water regulator has the budget for this, so I expect industry did it, or one of industry's computer companies. This is the original historic record on my water well, gas present, no, it said. This is what they replaced it with, gas blank. And I checked the other contaminated water wells in Alberta, and they did the same thing. I see horrified faces in the audience. This is for real. And don't worry, I backed up all my historic records. I backed up the altered ones too. So in Canada intentionally contaminated our aquifers. Crew and Caltex up by Grand Prairie in northern Alberta accidentally contaminated freshwater aquifers in Alberta. They perforated into the freshwater zones just like in Canada did, but they meant to perforate far deep down. They knew something was wrong, and they are so arrogant because no regulators hold them to account. They fractured anyways and blasted a massive amount of gelled propane into the drinking water aquifers. This is the fracking that's still allowed in New York State. They say New York State has a frack ban. It only has a frack. They did a really tricky, slippery thing defining fracking a certain way, where it can only be fracks with water. Some of the fracks in Alberta are 100% hydrocarbon-based. Diesel. Are they using used diesel? The regulators knew. They lied to us for over a year. Fracking uses a massive amount of water. This is right outside of Calgary. It's the suburbs. They build these massive pools to hoard the water. Here they are here. The trucks don't heed the traffic laws either, not the water laws. This vehicle had to hit the brakes as well as the vehicle taking the photo, or the person in the vehicle. These are the pump jacks. Here they're fracking for oil. Incredible road damages. We have roads that go straight for miles, and they are built to tolerate 40 below winters. What's going to happen to your roads up here if you let these guys frack? The damages are massive, they're dangerous, and the taxpayers pay to fix this, not the companies. Road damages in Quebec. You've heard Quebec has a frack ban. Not anymore. The government has just put forward 4 bills to allow fracking in rivers and lakes in Quebec. So my first court hearing, with Justice Barbara Veldhuis, she asks for a shorter statement of claim. I didn't want to argue with her. It cost me another year, a whole bunch of money. And she offers to be case management judge, which she said would move things forward quickly and make things nice and efficient. Case management in Alberta, if you get stuck with a bad judge, you're stuck with that bad judge. You get no, like lots of times when you go in for a hearing in court, you get whatever judge is next. I've learned that case management is to make sure that civil plaintiff cases like mine go nowhere. Then there's a case management phone call, and the defendants demand to have my lawsuit moved from a rural jurisdiction to a city jurisdiction, to downtown Calgary, where they can just walk across the street to the courthouse, and all the rural people supporting my case have to travel for miles. It would cost me more money for my lawyers, but it also intimidates the rural people. I'm not comfortable in a city. I was in Sligo today, that's pretty comfortable there, but Calgary is a pretty horrible place to be. And they even admitted in the case management call that it tipped in their favor. The judge said, no, legally we have to have it in the jurisdiction where the harms took place, which is Drumheller. But Encana's lawyers whined and said, oh, but if it's in Drumheller, we won't drive there. It's an hour and a half away. Multi-billion-dollar oil company can't drive to a courthouse. This is their office in Drumheller, and Synovus has an office across the street. Look at that, there's trucks over there. They drove to Drumheller, the workers. They moved my case to Calgary. And then the energy regulator filed a brief to get ready for the next court hearing, and in this brief, they suddenly changed me being a criminal to me being a terrorist. No evidence, no documentation, no criminal charges, no fingerprinting, no trial. No duty of care to us or our water, and they are legally immune for everything. Then Alberta, the government mandated frac focus, which is a fraud. That's where the frac chemicals are to be disclosed on a website. They have it in British Columbia, Alberta, some of the states. You'll probably get it here in the UK if they, anywhere that they push the fracking forward. The industry controls it. They only post the chemicals 30 days after fracking, which makes it impossible for you to protect your water well. If you don't know what chemicals they're injecting, how are you going to protect your water well? How will you test properly? And all those other chemicals are not disclosed at all. The drilling and servicing chemicals, which are often much more toxic. So the day of the hearing in January, I opened my my back door to my property to get ready to go to court. And here's Encana has a crew getting ready to frack a well 400 meters from my already contaminated water well. They can't drive to a courthouse, but they can bring all these trucks to rural properties. The court in Calgary is packed. This in red here says Encana argued nothing in court. And I believe in taking a stand. I'm a scientist, though. I'm not an activist. I'm not a protester. I'm not a fractivist. I decided to attend court in the courthouse where, by law, my hearing is supposed to be heard. I had a witness come. We asked the clerk's permission to sit in the waiting room. We asked permission to use the drinking water fountain. We told them, if you don't want to give us permission, we'll wait in the truck. Oh, no, it's a public building. You get to sit there. At the end of the day, when the defendants found out what I had done, they told the press that I had been given special treatment and that they had let me see the whole hearing via live link, which is a lie. I saw nothing. I had to pay for the hearing, but I didn't even see what happened. And my case was subsequently moved back to Drumheller. We can have a really big impact with our imaginations. Alberta Environment wanted contamination removed and all the other contaminated water wells in my community. That's some water regulator. The EU 2012 report has a fantastic amount of information in it, and it admits that 25 to 100% of water is lost permanently. It's a massive amount of fresh water that's being lost permanently. Then the Stephen Harper government promotes the case management judge on my case. My lawyers told me, don't worry about it, Jessica. Whenever judges are promoted, they always complete their rulings on hearings that they heard. When we asked her in a case management phone call, she said, no, not an option. So another year, or almost a year, is lost. Stephen Harper had demoted Justice Neil Whitman from the Court of Appeal to become chief of the Court of Queen's Bench, and he volunteered to take over. Put into position a judge that's going to probably service Encana and the oil and gas industry. The deregulation's going quite strong now. Gerard Prati, who was the VP of Encana, is put into position as the chairman of the energy regulator. And the public interest is removed from the mandate. The Campbells have thermogenic oil and gas, or thermogenic gases in their water: methane, ethane, propane, butane, pentane. They have some of the most damning data in Alberta. This is after their water well is contaminated, and the data proves industry contaminated their well, and another frac crew is coming to their neighbors to frac more. They frac you again and again. This is a really bad resource. So they have to constantly frack more and more and more and re-frack the wells they've already fracked. I'm still hauling water. I can't pay to repair damages to my house because everything I have is going in to pay for this lawsuit. That's going to make me really rich. So if you want to be my friend. So 8 months later, Neil Whitman, who was the Chief Justice of Alberta, who volunteered to take over, he rules on a hearing he did not hear. And I don't understand why the screen is not showing, the projector's acting up, but he puts in his ruling that the regulator judged me a terrorist in the total absence of evidence. There's none. But he punishes me, he lets the regulator have total legal immunity, and he makes me pay their legal fees. He says I have a valid charter claim, but to prevent other Canadians from doing what I'm doing, because don't forget they want to frack Canada from coast to coast to coast, he says, no, I can't have Canadians dressing up in their charter clothes. So he ruled against me. Contamination does get to stay in my statement of claim, and I get to sue the taxpayer-funded water regulator, but not the industry-funded energy regulator. They both have legal immunity. So what kind of judicial contradiction is that? I'm a scientist. All this legal stuff makes absolutely no sense to me, other than protecting the polluters. Another water contamination case by Pinoca. This is Anne Craft's contamination case. Her son goes to a lawyer to seek legal advice. I had nothing to do with this. I was actually on tour in Newfoundland at the time when this interview happened. This is Glenn Solomon, who was the lawyer for the energy regulator in my case, and he's talking to this son about my case, which he's not supposed to do. But he says some very interesting things. The son tape recorded this legal advice. And Glenn Solomon is talking about my case, and he smears me. He calls my case World War III. You can listen to this whole 4 minutes online on YouTube. And he says most of these cases resolve. Okay, we damaged your water well. The lawyers know. The engineers know. The geologists know. The regulators know. The water regulators, the politicians, they know fracking is contaminating water. The lawyers even know. Okay, we damaged your water well. We'll just set you up with potable water through a tank system forever. Who wants a tank system forever? Because you know, we just spent $1 million and we made $100 million. They don't care. And then he says, by doing that, they'll give us this, you sign a gag order. By doing that, you shut up. We get the regulator off our back, and we get to do it again down the street. Again and again and again. And the judges are signing these things. The lawyers know. The judges know. Then the water regulator tries a third time to get my case thrown out, which cost me another year and a whole bunch more money, but something good came out of it because the lawyer for the water regulator says in court in Drumheller, we're back in Drumheller now, here's Neil Whitman, these are my lawyers.